if you need a pen in my backpack on the outside pocket, there's a pen. Yes, fine, they could use it. It's in the pen case. Colorful pen case, outside zipper. Yeah, the one that has everything in it.
Let me know when this stops being straight. Well, it doesn't have to be all the way in the middle. Just have to look straight. I think this is fine.
Use for yours. We'll put mine over here. It's a beautiful
Would you,
day.
would you like, Kiana, based on the view, would you like to have the, I don't know if you can see the other table, so Barbara,
You can't come in. You can come in.
to have Barbara's books also on this table, because we have them on the other table. I don't know if you can see that on the live stream.
Not right now, because right now they're using this.
Okay, so I'm gonna move her pile of books over here. Yes, to have both. Yeah, that's important. So that's on view. If not, it's not on view. So we want it on view. Yes, we want to make sure that.
Do I text Barbara what we're doing? Oh, she has. He's brushing his teeth.
Okay, do we want this here now or not? Because now it feels like it doesn't. I feel like we don't. It looks awkward. Yeah.
You want to move it closer, or you want to just take it away?
Just one is fine.
I guess that's the reason my concern for this moment. You know, just
Aesthetically, you know, why they just look inside. Yeah. Hold on. Oh, I'm sorry.
here. Hold on. When we get to the music, I think just the last two songs.
The last one too. I have 4 tabs open, so you tell me which one.
Just
I have tears, whistle,
the last tears and then
Nina Simone.
Nina Simone.
Okay. The last tears. Okay, this
That
is.
last of those, all the tears that are there.
Okay, gotcha.
No, I don't see it. Hey, how are you?
Welcome, welcome. Hello.
Hey, what's you got?
Welcome back. So so when I do the slideshow, Barbara won't be on screen. But once for the conversation, I'm not doing the slideshow, and then Barbara will be on screen. Okay. But the way I'm gonna do it so it won't be like all big. It'll just be I'll minimize the window.
Fatima, is that okay? Okay. Thank you so much.
Welcome, welcome, everyone. Welcome to Defending the Humanities, a conversation with Hess Scholars Paul Ortiz and Barbara Smith. Woo! I am Carla España, the Wolf Institute Faculty Associate and Assistant Professor in Puerto Rican and Latino Studies. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you for those of you joining in person, those of you who are joining online. I'm getting texts from our faculty and students who are on our YouTube right now, so this is a great, great thing. This event is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be posted on the Wolf Institute YouTube channel. If you are a student and you did not get to sign in on the way in, please make sure you sign on the way out. We would like to thank the Maria E. Sanchez Center for Latino Studies, the Black Race and Ethnic Studies Initiative, and the Robert L. Hess Memorial Fund for making this event possible, as well as all the other 22 campus sponsors for their support. They are listed in the program that you received. This event is the first public event of Professor Ortiz's 2023 to 24 Hess Scholar residency. So welcome to this launch. We're so excited you're here. He will be back on campus for a series of events during the first week of April. I know it sounds like it's far away, but it's going to be here soon, so save the dates, first week of April. The program you received at the door includes a QR code that leads you to our social media pages. Please follow them so you can receive information on upcoming Hess Week programming with Professor Paul Ortiz. To start, because poetry is my heart, I'm so thrilled to welcome Professor Daniel Campos. Hold on. Professor Daniel Campos, if you can please come up. Chair of Philosophy, and give me 1 second. We are managing multiple things today, and so I appreciate your patience as make sure I get everything up for you to be able to see. There we go. Okay. Yes. Professor Campos is professor and chairperson of philosophy at Brooklyn College and the author of Loving Immigrants in America and Sino Peripatetico. Both books are focused on the personal experience and interpersonal ethics of migration and transnational living. Welcome, and we're thrilled to hear your poem.
Thank you. Thank you, Carla, and welcome everyone. It's not, I will read a poem. It's not my poem. It's a poem by Emily Grossholtz, who is an American poet and philosopher. She was awarded Guggenheim Fellowships twice throughout her career. And this poem is from her collection, The Stars of Earth. So I will read. In praise of the humanities, the epigraph says, variations on Ervin Panofsky's The History of Art as a Humanistic Discipline. Louder?
Yeah. The mic is not working.
Oh, it's not working?
We just have a very teacher.
Okay.
Very loud.
I'll project. Okay. So, in praise of the humanities, 9 days before his death, Immanuel Kant received his doctorate. Ill and nearly blind, he rose up, trembling, from his chair. The physician realized
You all know CUNY. We're having some tech issues, so we just go with it and adapt.
Okay.
Thank you for your patience.
Is this. Okay. Can you hear me now? Now it's okay?
And the poem is in your book.
Okay. I'll read again. I'll start again. In praise of the humanities. 9 days before his death, Immanuel Kant received his doctorate. Ill and nearly blind, he rose up, trembling, from his chair. The physician realized Kant would not sit down again till he himself seated. Das Gefühl für Humanität hat nicht verlassen. The sense of humanity has not left me. The visitor was moved almost to tears. Humanitas has two opposed clear meanings. Cicero gave the classical formulation, opposing men to beasts, respect for moral values, and a gracious blend of learning and urbanity. Now we might call it culture. The Middle Ages overturned this concept by another, opposing humanity to God and linking it with transience, frailty, humanitas caduca. The Renaissance notion, our inheritance, is thoroughly ambivalent, combining the dignity of man, freedom and reason, and limits, error, sin, mortality. This marriage yields the cardinal modern virtues, responsibility and tolerance. The humanist, then, rejects authority, but he respects tradition. What use are the humanities as such? Admittedly, they're not practical and focus upon the past. Why should we bother to think about the past? The answer to both questions is just the same, because the real concerns us. The life of contemplation is no less real than the active life, nor is what it bestows on reality less central. As for the past, it's no more puzzling than the elusive now. Grasping reality requires a fair detachment from the present. The sciences arrest what otherwise would slip away, but the humanities enliven what would otherwise be dead. A subtle difference exists in Latin between scientia and eruditio. Scientia is possession, mastery. Eruditio is a process, more like wisdom. History, Ficino wrote, is needed not just to make our lives agreeable, but to extend their moral significance, to make what's absent present, rejuvenate all things, bestow experience on the young. Indeed, it makes of every man a Noah. We live as many centuries as span our knowledge of history, a rainbow fleeting in itself that stays across the lucid gray of consciousness. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Campos. We are also thrilled to welcome back Barbara Smith, our 2022-2023 Hess Scholar. Barbara was first here in March, and she was hoping to once again join us in person today. However, she was not able to make the trip, but Barbara's commitment is such that she is joining via Zoom. Woo, we see you, Barbara! She is an author, activist, and independent scholar who has played a groundbreaking role in opening up a national, cultural, and political dialogue about the intersections of race, class, sexuality, and gender. She was among the first to define an African-American women's literary tradition and to build Black women's studies and Black feminism in the United States. Some of us know Barbara Smith through her writing. Many of us were sharing about these books back in April and the impact that they've had in our lives and continue to have in our lives. Also, students, please make sure that at the end, if you stick around, we have some of Barbara's books here, thanks to her publisher who sent The Truth That Never Hurts, the new revised edition there. So thank you, Barbara, for joining us today. Another round of applause. We see you. Last week, several of us met our next guest, the 2023-2024 Hess Scholar in Residence, Paul Ortiz, at a reading group on his book, An African American and Latinx History of the United States. Paul Ortiz is professor of history and director of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at the University of Florida. Most recently, Paul Ortiz was a former president of the Oral History Association and United Faculty of Florida at University of Florida, the union that represents tenured and non-tenured faculty at University of Florida. You can find, yes, that's important. We're very, very happy to have you here for that. You can find his most recent books, as you see some of them here, including the report. Let me show you that one. The report of the Presidential Task Force on African American and Native American History and the University of Florida, and Teaching Comparative African American and Latino histories in the age of neoliberal crisis. You can find these resources on the Brooklyn College Library Guide created by, where's Professor Helen Borges? Over there, wave. Thank you so much. Please join me in welcoming Professor Paul Ortiz to Brooklyn College. And I can't just briefly give that announcement so quickly at a topic for an event called Defending the Humanities without just lingering here for a moment. The library guide, in fact, also contains free access to many of Barbara Smith's works. The program you received at the door contains the link to the library guide, as well as full biographies of Barbara Smith and Paul Ortiz. And of course, as a treat, we also have books of copies of an African American and Latinx history of the United States, thanks to Paul's publisher, here for the students at the end of our event. Okay, just needed a moment for that, because always grateful when we can get free books. We are all here because of the impact that these scholars and activists continue to have on our lives as educators and human beings in a time when the humanity of some is completely disregarded. As we heard in the poem, humanities remind us that we must seek to enliven what otherwise be dead, what's absent make present, to rejuvenate old things and bestow experience. So we are here to ask, how do we get to tell our stories? What histories and present realities get shared in school and curriculum? What books get to be placed on library shelves and book fairs? We are also here because we are learning and teaching at a time of curriculum bans, book bans, and restrictions on funding and instruction from K-12 to colleges related to the experiences of the most marginalized. I'm a former middle grade teacher and a committee member of the National Council of Teachers of English for their middle level section for middle grade teachers. And I will never forget my English teacher colleague, and she was supposed to be my new teacher mentor. You know, when you become a teacher, you hopefully get a new teacher mentor. Well, this new teacher mentor and my English teacher colleague, we were in a planning meeting, and she turns to me and says, I haven't read many rigorous books by authors. I haven't read any rigorous books by authors of color. During an English department meeting at a school in New York. Let me repeat that, in New York State. Most recently, it was a New York City Department of Education staff member who asked for my presentation slides before a workshop with New York City bilingual teachers, censoring my use of the word supremacy. When discussing linguistic supremacy, I see you, Professor Mike Mena, we talk about this all the time, and racial-linguistic language ideologies in our teaching of bilingual and multilingual youth, saying, this is what she said, quote, I don't want to lose my job. Finally, after a day, I want to share this final anecdote. After a day full of lessons and workshops, reading Brooklyn author Jacqueline Woodson, picture books, and Chicana feminist Gloria Anzaldua's excerpts from The Borderlands, La Frontera, the New Mestiza memoir, with the middle school in Chappaqua, New York. I heard the chuckle. It's a suburb north. My supervisor at a literacy organization in New York City told me to leave all that multicultural work, quote, for my schools in the city. I share these brief anecdotes from New York to contextualize the times with these statistics on curriculum and book bans. So some of the key findings in PEN America's latest report include 3,362 book bans in the 2022-2023 school year, 40% of them occurring in your Florida school district, so I know we're going to talk about that. They note, quote, overwhelmingly, book bans target books on race or racism or featuring characters of color, as well as books with LGBTQ plus characters. According to the American Library Association, these books challenges are happening across public libraries, school libraries, K-12, and college settings. And of course, you may be familiar with what was happening with AP African American History and the response from the College Board, which was a very revised curriculum, removing a lot of things that they're now piloting in over 800 high schools, while California adopted a model ethnic studies curriculum back in 2021. These challenges these challenges to the humanities also extend to higher education. And I know, Paul, you can talk about your Florida context because there are so many that you've responded to and organized with to respond to these. So now teaching in Puerto Rican and Latino Studies Department with courses cross-listed with childhood bilingual and special ed, I'm constantly reminded by our students who are here that our freedom to read, our freedom to learn, and our freedom to teach from the perspective of populations that have been denied that right continues to be this ongoing struggle. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, Barbara. We're going to enlarge you a little bit here on the screen so we'll see you. Thank you so much for your criticality, that example of criticality and activism rooted in community. And I leave you all with our Wolf Institute Director and Professor of Political Science, Gaston Alonso, who's going to be guiding the conversation. Thank you. Okay.
I want to first thank you all for coming. We are at to capacity. For those that are online and cannot tell, we're on to capacity. Some of you who are in the back, if you want to come, there's some seats still in the sort of in the middle, and you're always welcome to come and sit up front. But thank you so much for coming. This is an urgent and important conversation, as Carla sort of reminded us. So thank you, Carla, for reminding us, right, about the importance and the urgency of this conversation. Thank you, Danielle, for reminding us why the humanities matter. And I want to thank Kiana Benjamin and the incredible Wolf team I work with. Thank you for making this happen. And I must thank Fatima Davis and the tech team at the library who managed to get this all going. So thank you so much for that. Now we're going to take some time to have a conversation between Barbara and Paul, and then we'll open it up for questions towards the end. And Barbara, I was going to start with you. When you were here in March, during one of the panels, you mentioned that when the attacks on critical race theory began, you started to sound the alarm, and you started telling your friends that, quote, they are coming for everything we built during the last 40 years. End of quote. I wonder if you could start by kind of explaining what you meant then and how you're seeing the situation now.
Thank you so much, Gaston, Professor Alonso. I hope everyone can hear me and hear me well.
Yes.
Before I respond to your question, I have to say thank you. Thank you so much for making it possible for me to be with all of you today. I was so excited to hear that room that I'm so familiar with in the library is full. That's delightful to me. And everything that's happened today has made me wish that I had been able to come down. But I look forward to joining you sometime next year during the time that Professor Ortiz is with you for his wonderful Hess week. I also want to thank Professor Estania, who has welcomed me and who has been very much a part of making this experience and this event happen, as well as everything else that will happen as far as Hess activities are concerned. And I want to thank Kiana Benjamin and the rest of the Wolf team, the Wolf Institute team, for doing these miracles so that I can at least be with you as a facsimile of myself. So the reason that I said that thing in the spring, when we were talking about these issues, about how certain elements in our society, very horrible elements, were coming after all that we had worked for so many years, is because I am of the generation, having been, I'm still a baby boomer, and having been born and grown up in the mid-20th century, it was my generation, and maybe the generation a little bit before, and certainly the generation subsequently, who really built Black studies, ethnic studies, women's studies, LGBTQIA+ studies, all of that in the United States, because in my school experience, we never had it. We had to work really, really hard in order to, just as Carla said, justify and explain to people that the work that we were interested in, and the writers and the artists and all of the political scientists, historians, whoever they were, that they were creating work that was just as credible as that of the dead white men that we were absolutely expected to spend our whole educational lives both learning about and worshiping. So when critical race theory became the buzzword, and of course, the people who are doing that don't even really know who do that to this day. They don't know what critical race theory is. It's a legal theory that is taught in law schools, and it never comes into, almost never comes into K through 12 or pre-K through 12 curriculum because it's not a basic subject for your primary and secondary education. It's a grad school subject, specifically a law school subject. But in any event, they didn't know what it was, but they did know it had the word race in it, and they wanted to erase all of us who had worked so hard to expand the curriculum and to provide education for generations following ours that was far more diverse, far more rich, far more insightful than anything that we had been exposed to up until that point when we were only studying one group of people and only one gender of people.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. I'm going to go to Paul now. So Paul, come on up because we're going to have to share the podium because we're at Brooklyn College and our funding is right. Now, Paul, you are in my home state of Florida. Lucky you. And it's one of the flashpoints, really, for a lot of these kinds of attacks on the humanities and education in general. So I was wondering if you could give us a sense of what you've been seeing, what is motivating these kinds of attacks, and why at this moment rather than, at other moments. Turn it over to you.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank my colleagues at the Wolf Institute and Brooklyn College generally for inviting me here to work with you this academic year. It's thrilling for me. It's humbling as a child of the humanities, as a first-generation college student, to be with you, and especially to be able to work with incredible people, Professor Gaston, Barbara Smith. I'm having an incredible fanboy moment right now because as I was a younger organizer, learning how to be an organizer and learning how to combine the humanities with movement organizing, Barbara Smith was a person, a guide, an icon, a trusted role model of my entire organizing life. I also want to mention that today, actually, there's a student from the Federal University of São Carlos in Brazil, who just arrived in Florida today to work with me this academic year. She's doing a dissertation at the Federal University in São Carlos on Zora Neale Hurston. Some of you may have heard about Zora Neale Hurston, one of the great novelists in the history of this country, an African-American writer who did most of her work in Florida. This is one of the many demonstrations how important the humanities and how popular ethnic studies, African-American history, Latino history, Asian American history is globally, worldwide. And I think this gets to your question about why the timing of this attack. The attack on ethnic studies, and some of you may be familiar with the fact that the state of Florida, many of the leaders, the legislators have tried to ban Black studies. They're trying to ban gender studies. They've already banned critical race theory in the public schools. And they've also banned the 1619 history curriculum. So the question is why, the timing. The reason why is that we're here today. Okay, now I'm not blaming this on us, right? What I'm saying is that I work with school districts all across the entire country. And it's middle school and high school students who are demanding changes in the curriculum. This is what they want, 3 things. They want a more inclusive curriculum. It needs to be more small d democratic. They want not just the usual suspects, but they want a broader cast of characters in key moments of U.S. history, whether it's the American Revolution, whether it's World War II. They want women, they want African Americans, they want young people, they want transgender people in the curriculum. And then the third thing is this thing we call intersectionality, which sometimes we don't take seriously enough, but we should, because this is what is horrifying these leaders in the state of Florida. They don't want to see us getting together. They don't want to see us understanding that African American and Latino history and Asian American history and labor history and working class white history. They don't want us to see the connections. What I mean by this is that even this day, there are Jewish and Muslim and Arab students organizing on my campus trying to build a new kind of social movement, okay? They're doing things that I couldn't have imagined when I was in college. But again, they're terrifying the people in charge of the society. The people in the charge, the people that run the society want us to compete with each other. They want us to see the society as a zero-sum game. If there's money for a war, there can't be money to keep your library open on the weekend. If there's money for the Pentagon, there can't be money to double or triple the size of Latino Puerto Rican studies. The short time I've been on campus, obviously there's a tremendous demand for all these topics, right? How are students being served on our campuses? And see, this is why I think the timing that we're seeing now, the attacks, because remember, a lot of these theories, well, theory is the key thing. Ethnic studies really brings to bear the idea that the system needs to be changed, okay? And that's another reason why the attacks are so hard-hitting right now. But again, the good news is that the impetus, young people demanding new ways of looking at history, and the humanities plays a key role in that.
Thank you, Paul. And I think we can see young people's interest by the way that this room has filled to capacity. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Paul. You know, this is not the first time, clearly, that the right has gone against the humanities and education. But I think the framing has shifted some. Back when I was in college in the 80s, we had Lynn Cheney heading the National Endowment for the Humanities. We had Arthur Schlesinger doing his thing. We had people doing their thing. And the argument that they used to try to silence the voices and the curriculums they didn't want to hear was, you know, well, this work is just not that good, right? The old sort of excellence or diversity argument. You had to sort of choose. And while we still hear that argument today, Carla apparently heard it recently, right? There's another argument that is being sort of used, and it goes something like this. Teaching the material they want to ban is a form of discrimination because it makes some students feel uncomfortable or ashamed, right? And so according to this logic, the kind of gag orders that Carla shared the graphics about and that Paul and Barbara raised, those gag orders, they argue, right, they are justified as an anti-discrimination measure. That is, that was the position that the Stop Woke case in Florida, where the court found that, in fact, that argument didn't have much merit. But it has a lot of political currency, and it's being used very effectively. And so, Paul and Barbara, and whoever wants to go first, I was wondering what you think about this new kind of attack, this new argument that's being used. Gag orders as anti-discrimination measures, and how does one respond to it? I'm not sure, Barbara or Paul, whoever wants to go first. Oh, come on. And then we'll turn it over to Barbara.
Try to get to here.
Professor Espani, I believe in introducing me, mentioned that I've been president of the United Faculty of Florida for a number of years. I'm still an officer in the union. And the way that we have defended ethnic studies, the way we've defended the humanities is through collective bargaining. What I mean by this is that our union made it very clear when the state of Florida talked about banning gender studies, we're not going to stand for this. If you have a collective bargaining agreement, the administration, the Board of Trustees, cannot radically change the terms and conditions of your working lives unless they negotiate it with you, the union. That's why union power is so absolutely critical at this juncture. I've lost the thread of what's the rest of the question?
I was asking your response to this kind of new argument that's being used, right?
Yeah.
You know, because teaching some of this material may make, they argue, make some
Yeah.
people uncomfortable, therefore we should gag it.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. Good education. Look, when I was in a seminar room in college, one of my professors, Stephanie Kuntz, who I still think is the best historian in this country, her job was to make us feel uncomfortable. Her job was to upset us. Her job was to shake our worldviews and turn our worldview upside down. That's what she saw. That was the role of the teacher, right? And I think right now, let me take a step back. I'm going to say something which is going to be quite embarrassing to me personally as a labor historian. But in the past several years, I've given a lot of, I've always given a lot of workshops, history workshops to movement organizations. I came up with the labor movement. My first history workshops were with the United Farm Workers Union during the Chateau Saint Michel wine boycott, which took 8 years to win. We won that. There's still a union contract in force, by the way, over 30 years later. But in recent years, as I became a privileged university professor, I give lectures now to corporations. And I give lectures to corporations on Latino studies, on African American history, on other allied topics, to corporations like, this trips me out, Deutsche Bank, Bank of America, Guggenheim Partners, Microsoft. And the reason I give those lectures is I've been asked by these corporations because these corporations are saying our employees demand this. Okay, so these are not on college campuses. And in fact, the most freewheeling conversations I have, other than the one I just had this afternoon with your wonderful students, the most freewheeling discussions I've had on any of these topics, Gaston, have been in these corporations. And what they're telling me is they want gender studies students. They want Black studies students. What do I mean by this? At the end of these lectures on Black History Month, on Latino History Month for these big Fortune 100 corporations, there's always a pause. And at the end of that pause, the VP of HR will say, Professor Ortiz, how do we recruit more of your students in these fields? We want gender studies students. We want Black studies students. And see, this is what's happening. It's percolating all across the society. I'm not saying these corporations are progressive, because they're not. They're demanding these new curriculum ideas, again, because of their employees and because of who they're trying to recruit. It turns out the humanities is a really lucrative major, by the way. I have not one, but 2 corner offices at the University of Florida. Okay? It's pretty good for a child of the working class. And humanities has been very good to me.
Thank you, Paul. Barbara, you want to go ahead?
Thank you. If I can chime in. This thing of it, well, I just want to say something about quality. I think it's really hard to recognize what quality is, artistic quality, quality in the humanities, quality in academics, if you have decided in advance that certain kinds of people don't have the capacity for genius. So that's a problem. That was the old excuse for why we can't teach certain people. So Toni Morrison got the Nobel Prize for Literature. And a lot of people, or at least some people, tell me it's really hard for me to understand Toni Morrison's book. They're saying the same thing that I might have said about Ezra Pound when I was in graduate school. It's really hard for me to understand what Ezra Pound is writing about. But instead of it being a European American male, it is a Black woman from Ohio. I'm a Black woman from Ohio as well. Slightly different parts of the state, but we both Toni Morrison and I, am very pleased to say, grew up in Ohio, the middle of the country. But be that as it may, that excuse about how it's not quality, that's absurd to stand. And then the other more recent excuse that you mentioned is also absurd, which is we have to protect our students from feeling anything bad or negative in the context of their education. Just as Professor Ortiz said that his favorite history teacher, who he thinks is the greatest history teacher, whose name, of course, I'm familiar with, her job, as she saw it when he was in graduate school, was to turn her students' ideas over on their heads. So for one thing, they could learn how to think, and they could learn how to investigate new information when their professor wasn't holding their hand and wasn't there with them. If you can turn something upside down and look at it another way, then you are absolutely doing what's needed. And that's why those corporations, again, that Professor Ortiz mentioned, that's why they want those majors, they want those people who have a different point of view, because they know with the status quo, the status quo, they're not going to get those new ideas. They're not going to get those innovations. They're not going to have workplaces that can retain other workers because they don't feel like they belong there. This information, the things that we have devoted our lives to, is some of the most wonderful information that you could possibly access. The actual history of our country, the history of everybody who's ever been on these shores, ever lived in this, on this landmass for millennia in the past, that's wonderful. The writing, the art, the music, the poetry, the literature of people, all of us who lived here, that's also pretty great. No one ever cared if Paul and I felt raised in the classroom. Nobody cared about our little feelings. And since I'm older than Paul, they cared even less than about mine.
I hear you, Barbara. As a gay man of color, I've never felt comfortable. Even right now. Just letting you know. So we've been talking about this kind of outwardly political attacks, but not all of the challenges and not all of the attacks are outwardly political. That is, well, we also are, sometimes they take the form of budgetary mechanisms, right? Either through underfunding existing departments and programs, such as no new hires, shrunken administrative budgets, no operating budgets, shutting down departments, shutting down programs, or to the refusal to actually create new programs and new departments. And those budgetary mechanisms are sometimes harder to fight against because they masquerade as not being political, right? They're political, but they masquerade as not being explicitly political. And so I was wondering, Paul and Barbara, what do you think about that strategy? And what do you suggest we do about it? And Paul, if you want to come up, then we'll...
Well, as a program director at a university for the last, since 2008, budget cuts are a way of life, especially in the humanities, right? Especially in ethnic studies, especially in what we used to call the helping professions. And we just have to think about the fact that all across the country, this has been a trend, not just in Brooklyn, not just in Florida. If you think of a book to read on this, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore's wonderful book, The Golden Gulag, on the literally, California makes a decision at a certain point, not just the state, but capital makes this decision to replace factories in Southern California with prisons. And again, this isn't just one state, it's all across the country. But that's the trend really since the 1970s. And there's a whole great scholarship, my dear friend Jordan Camp, who wrote Incarcerating the Crisis. Other works talk about this as well. What I talk about in African American Latinx history of the U.S. is that this defunding itself is a counterattack against the rise of Puerto Rican studies, the rise of Black studies, especially what we used to call third world liberation studies. Now, I want us to think back on the origins of all of these ethnic studies and women's studies and labor studies programs, because at a certain point, especially in the 60s and early 70s, all of them were tied to what we used to call third world liberation struggles. And that's another thing that's really under attack, is this idea that we could create coalitions with people, not just in our own groups, not just in the Chicano community in Los Angeles, or not just in the Dominican community in Washington Heights, not just in the Cuban American community in Miami, but across ethnic lines, across class and race lines, across national lines. And this is what's happening increasingly across the world right now. And this is another reason for the timing of the attacks. I feel very strongly about this. My wife and I were just in Egypt for a week. It was an incredible trip. Everywhere we went, we were minor celebrities. Why? We were the only Americans seemingly in the entire country because the U.S. State Department has put Egypt on its terrorism watch list, okay? But we had such incredible conversations. And again, to be able to leave this country and talk to people about how they see the U.S. is a precious, and I think humanities experience. It's an oral history experience for me, right? Because everywhere we went in Egypt, people said, we love Americans. We love your culture. We love talking with you. But please tell Joe Biden we don't want any more war. That was the big takeaway, okay? And they said, we tried war. We tried that in the 60s and 70s. It doesn't work. You've got to make decisions. We want to build a national health care system. We want national collective bargaining. We want a national retirement system. We want affordable housing in Egypt. We know you've got to make a decision. You either have war, a warfare state, like y'all have in the U.S., or you have these things, like your seniors don't have to worry about begging and starving and being poor, okay? So again, that's the kind of humanities knowledge that really is under attack. Why would Egypt be put on the terrorism list when the U.S. government is trying to get Egypt to accept hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees? It doesn't really make any sense. I'm in danger of going into a soapbox speech. I'll stop there.
Barbara.
Sorry about that. One of the things about the attack on the humanities, and I think we've already referred to this as only perhaps indirectly, is because of the success of what we have been able to do as far as transforming what we understand to be the knowledge most worth having. And our generation, and I now join Paul in a generation, because it has been a generational and a multi-generational effort to transform the monochromatic, monovision, narrative way of looking at the world and expanding. I like what Professor Ortiz said about the graduate student who's coming to work with him from Brazil, and what that graduate student is studying is the work of Zora Neale Hurston, an African-American writer from the early 20th century. And being as familiar with Zora Neale Hurston's work as I am, and I've read all of her works, not just the most well-known of them. I haven't read all of the folklore, but I've definitely read all of the novels. And the very fact that someone from another country could say, this speaks to me, this experience speaks to me. And that means that the work probably is a classic, just like Shakespeare is supposed to speak to everybody, and we can all see ourselves in those characters from, the Renaissance or whatever that was, whatever period that was long ago. People can look at Zora Neale Hurston. People can look at Gloria Anzaldúa. People can look at Leslie Norman Silko, an indigenous writer, or Joy Harjo. People can look at Maxine Hong Kingston and Amy Tan, all these incredible writers whose stories at the end of the day are about us. Not because we lived in the same house that they did or lived in the same community that they did, because it's about the basics of what unifies us. And that's another thing that Paul talked about. They're afraid of the unification. They're afraid of us coming together. And the humanities at its best is about that unification. I've never taken a philosophy course, and I've never taken a political science course. Some people would say, really? Because you're doing that. You do it every day. Why? Because I have a strong basis in the humanities. I can like skip disciplines, or go from one discipline to another, because I have that strong background. And I can also recognize the greatness of other people's cultures and lives.
Great, thank you. I'm so proud of the Hess Scholars, and I'm so proud to have you both here. I have one more question, and then we can open up for question and answers. And this is the sort of what do we do, right? Now, most of the reporting on these attacks in the last year tends to be episodic, right? This is what's going on in New Hampshire. This is what's going on in Oklahoma. This is going on in Iowa. This is going on in Florida, and this is going on in Florida, and this is going on. Just a lot happening in Florida, right? And then, as Carlo reminded us, it's also in New York, right? But when we step back, right, it's clear that these episodes are part of a well-organized, well-funded national campaign, right? And so, given that, right, and given as Carla already told us, you both bring a lot of organizing experience with you. What do you think are effective ways forward for those who want to stop these attacks and defend the humanities and education in general? Barbara, let me start with you, and then we'll go to.
Thank you, Doctor. I think the major thing is for us to be well informed, and what we're doing this afternoon is toward that end, having a kind of ranging, wide view discussion of the humanities and how they function, and understanding, it's not just those dull, assigned books that everyone kind of grits their teeth. They're not just the vegetables of the curriculum. There's some desserts in there as well. But in any event, having this kind of discussion is really about creating a community of people who embrace the humanities, who love the humanities, who will defend the humanities. I really feel that community mobilization is really, really important in figuring out what you can do with the resources that you have. We didn't get a chance to talk about book banning, but of course, that is another feature of the climate that we are in at this time. Saying that certain books do not deserve to be read, they should not be read by people under a certain age or by anyone over any age at all, if indeed they let you know something about this country that is not about perfection, that is not about a myth. But what the Brooklyn Public Library did when that began to happen is that they made their library books accessible as by defining people who could be borrowers, not just by people who lived in the New York City area, but by anyone who wanted to have a library card and utilize Brooklyn Library, Brooklyn Public Library resources. They did that. That was a policy decision. There was probably some expense associated with it, but they were very, very creative about what can we do to fight that. People put little bookshelves in communities where libraries are restricted. That's just one thing that people can do, but mobilizing, informing yourself, coming together with people who have similar perspectives. And what I hear a lot of these days is that people need to run for and get on the school board so that the people who want to suppress knowledge and close it down do not have the final say.
Thank you, Barbara. Paul?
Everything Barbara said, community mobilization is key. We have to be there for each other. When one of us is attacked as a librarian, as a student, as a faculty member, as a teacher, the system, the people who are trying to ban books, trying to ban our studies, trying to dumb us down, they realize, my dear colleague Nancy McLean at Duke University has written a wonderful book on this. They realize that they're a minority of the population. They're very wealthy individuals who are fueling and funding these attacks. And we're the majority. But we need to start acting like the majority. And this afternoon, during our lunchtime conversation, the word solidarity came up. The people trying to ban the books right now and attacking us, they count on us being individual and feeling isolationist and feeling, oh, if I'm a librarian and someone has just made an aggressive call, I just have to internalize it. If I'm a faculty member dealing with budget cuts, we just have to take it. We need to stop that nonsense right now. And we need to be there for people. What's happening in Florida now? is that when people try to ban books, parents are stepping up and saying, well, we want to read those books. Why do you want to ban them? Let's read Toni Morrison's Beloved. Let's read Alice Walker's Meridian. Let's find out what these books are really all about, okay? And so I talk a lot about unions because I'm a union person, but I'm going to tell you, you don't have to be in a labor union to exercise solidarity, to be there for each other. And again, as Barbara mentioned, running for school board. But if you can't run for school board, go to school board meetings. Believe me, most of these people trying to ban books, when you actually talk with them and when they're being interviewed, oh, do you have a child in the school district? Well, no, but I care, okay? Well, all of us can go to a school board meeting, right? All of us can call, can be there for K through 12 teachers. I'll tell you a sad anecdote. I hate to end on a depressing note, but I used to have a lot of former students who were teachers in South Florida, Broward, Miami-Dade, West Palm. They're no longer teachers because no one was there for them. When they tried to assign Toni Morrison, when they tried to talk about slavery, when they tried to talk about immigration rights, it took one parent to get them to lose their jobs because the principal wasn't there for them, because the parents weren't there for them. Think of being in a classroom of 30 students and 30 of the students were thrilled at their lessons. We're excited to read Alice Walker. We're excited to read Perry Thomas. We're excited to read James Baldwin. It just took one parent who didn't even have to have a child in that class to get that teacher disciplined. And so do I have any former students who are teachers still working in South Florida? I do not. And that's a tragedy. But I give that as a cautionary tale to tell you what they were missing were people who had their backs, right? Your people that stepped up for them. What does it risk us to go to a school board meeting and demand a more inclusive, small d democratic, more intersectional curriculum? What does it cost us as college students to be there at a faculty meeting or at a meeting to say that we're there for our professors, and we need more of them, by the way. It's odd for a professor to ask for more professors. I apologize for that, by the way. Or support staff. We used to have much larger ethnic studies support staffs, Native American, Asian, Latino, first gen, veterans. Why are we allowing these programs to be cut? We don't have to. Again, we have to be there for each other to make sure the cuts stop.
Okay, so now we're going to open it up for comments and questions. I know Barbara and Paul are looking forward to it. Because of technical issues, we don't have a microphone for the audience that would work. We're talking about budget cuts, right? So what we're going to do, and Paul, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to put you to work. So if you could, once somebody says their question, if you could repeat it, and then you and Barbara can take turns responding, okay? And so just raise your hand, and we'll just go down. Yes?
I have a question about when you were talking about corporations asking for these discussions of like inclusivity. I was wondering, like, yes, they do come from the corporation workers themselves, but I wonder if the corporations use that as a tactic to kind of incorporate history in a means to kind of like, I would say, monetize it in a way.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like, how do you navigate through trying to have a space that has like an open discussion of being informative, but then taking that information and making money off of it?
That's a great question. So the question is, so if a corporation asks us to give a talk on ethnic studies or women's history or any topic, what's their motivation? And how do we deal with the fact that obviously it's a corporation, they're likely going to try to monetize it, okay? So I know the way that I answer that question, I mean, additionally, when I started getting invitations for corporations to speak, I turned them down. I mean, it like freaked me out. I'm like, whoa, I don't. And actually, I think it was Deutsche Bank that called me one day and they said, hey, we want you to give a talk in this book because our employees are reading it. I said, I have a chapter in here called The Government of American Banks. And they said, oh, we know all about it, okay? my sense was that the upper folks maybe weren't that comfortable, but the folks kind of at the grassroots really wanted to talk about it. And seriously, a great conversation. And oftentimes these conversations of corporations, it doesn't always go this way. And this isn't really a direct response. This is a very elliptical response to your very direct, important question. Oftentimes there'll be a little moment of silence, and then someone will pipe up and say, well, Professor Ortiz, do you think it's possible to create a just world under capitalism? And wow, what a great conversation to have. I mean, my gosh, I couldn't have asked for a better question. But are they monetizing multiculturalism? You bet. And the folks that started, you know, if you think of like San Francisco State, like one of my former PhD students is just got an offer from San Francisco State today. I'm just so thrilled. But that's where we had the third world strike in the 60s, you know, that created ethnic studies. But are people trying to monetize it? Oh, yes, they are. Very much so. Now, how do we deal with it? We just kind of, I think we just kind of roll with it. And we basically, we're just very candid. When I have those discussions, by the way, about capitalism, I'll say, well, I don't think you can create a just world under capitalism, but at the same time, I'm a union president. I administer a collective bargaining contract that happens in a capitalist context. So if I told you that you shouldn't be working within capitalism to try to improve it, I'd be a hypocrite.
Yeah, of course, thank you.
Barbara, did you have any thoughts on that? Oh, Barbara, you're on mute. Whoop.
I'm sorry, I'm so used to muting when I'm not speaking, I'm so sorry. No, I think it's fine, I think we can go on to another question.
Okay.
Great answer.
Yes.
Great answer.
My question is, I personally was not satisfied enough with like the budgetary question that Mr. Rolando asked. So currently, with everything that's going on with the genocide, we saw that there was a gap with there's no Middle Eastern studies here, and so I proposed it in our USG meeting as a senator, and the response that I got was like the response we're gonna get from administration is that it's budgetary. And you guys didn't really go into how people kind of abuse and masquerade budgetary cuts as as an excuse not to support these types of studies. So like, can you go more into that and how we can utilize it on our campus as well?
So Barbara, the question is, how can we talk? We want, the question is, the request is to go deeper into this budgetary cuts excuse. And so what I want to understand, you put forward a proposal about a Middle Eastern Studies program or major, and the response was?
Like, we were discussing it with our treasurer, and they said it has to go through a faculty. However, once we get it to administration, their response would be, where would the money come from? Because it would be taken from another department.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Barbara, did you get that?
I think I heard it, it's about the scarcity model, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
That students and others are asking for a certain subject matter to be incorporated into the curriculum, and the response of the institution is, well, if we have that, we're going to have to take away the other. And that is the scarcity model. I think that public pressure, in your case, that student pressure, campus pressure, organizing, being strategic, finding out where the gaps are. There's something that organizers do, which is to analyze, which is power structure analysis. You analyze, like, where are the holes, where are the pathways through to get what we need. We see a lot of that nowadays around the ongoing war. Those already before the ongoing war in in Israel-Palestine. Like, you can agree or not agree with shutting down the Manhattan Bridge, but it got people's attention. That was about strategy. I'm gonna have to mute for a second so I can get some water. So sorry. To try to finish up though, being strategic, working with others, looking at that power structure and seeing, okay, this is weakness here. It may not be a weakness, it may not be a lack of resources or lack of power, but these are weaknesses. How can we use that to get what we want? What better time than now to have robust Middle Eastern studies on every campus?
Yeah. And I would just, being an outsider, but I would push back against the idea that if you create a new area studies program, you're taking money away from existing programs. It's up to your administration in a public institution to go to bat for what the students and the community are desiring and are saying that this fits our educational needs. This society more than ever needs Middle Eastern studies programs. This society more than ever needs Black studies programs. This society more than ever needs Latino studies programs. And it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. I know New York City has a very large budget. Where it is a zero-sum game is that it's up to the city council or in a state level, if you're in a state institution, to say that, well, you know, we need to give more money to higher education. I mean, again, the trend is decreasing money from public education, public higher education especially. That's a national trend. To me, that's kind of a subsection of what you're talking about. But it's not, don't allow people to tell you, oh, you're taking money away from your fellow students. I suspect you know that's not true anyway.
Yeah.
Right. I guess that's something people in power have to say. Right? Next question. Yes.
So I agree that a bulk of that problem is driven not by a lack of actual money to spend, but prioritization of spending. And that if you could actually organize a social movement to put pressure on the decision makers, you could get more funding in these humanities programs. But it also seems to me that the last time that was actually effectively done to change national agenda level issues was some decades ago, and that might have died for the left with Abby Hoffman, frankly. How do you reignite that light that's been, frankly, dead for so long when conservatives can just innately do it?
Yeah. So, Barbara, the question, did you get that? It's basically how do we reignite kind of a larger public movement to make demands for a more robust, say, humanities, funding for humanities programs?
I always like the grassroots approach to everything. When people think of humanities, they think of those vegetables, those kind of intellectual vegetables and, academic, boredom. They don't think about, they don't think about Nika Moore, who actually is I don't know if he still lives in Brooklyn, but a wonderful Puerto Rican writer whose work is often marketed toward, although it's for everyone, marketed toward a young adult audience. They don't think about how much fun those kinds of experiences can be. You can get people engaged with the humanities by saying, let's have a people's history group. We live on these particular blocks in this particular neighborhood. We don't know what happened here even 20 or 30 years ago. Why don't we try to figure that out? That's history. That's learning. That's like doing your own history project, looking at cemeteries, looking at school buildings, looking at, what's in your neighborhood that was there. How do I find out what was there before? How do we find out about what was torn down? That's the humanities, Getting people engaged with humanities, as I said, if I thought humanities was what I was taught during all my years of education, I would run screaming away from it because I didn't see my face at all. I didn't see my face, I didn't see my life, I didn't see my family, I didn't see my community. But we can build that up, popular education, political education, grassroots education, reading poems on street corners is getting to love the humanities, is building love for the humanities. Music, that's free in parks, that's the humanities as well. And you can have your little flyers and your little, whatever it is, your little sign-in list or your like contact list or whatever, and say, That what you just heard, you know, that poet, or you know, music that you just heard, they're trying to get rid of that in our schools down the street. You know, this person who just played for you, played an instrument, these people who played these instruments for you, 30 years ago when they were in school, they could study those instruments in school, musical instruments. Now, they cut all of that. How do you feel about that? You know, that's how you do it. And I just think that human capacity of people to relate to each other and to be in solidarity with each other, it's just so important. That's what makes people good organizers. The willingness to see themselves and others, whether they are identical to that other person or not, our capacity to have like a meaningful conversation about what is really on people's minds and what's really worrying them, and from that you begin to build. I just, as I said, I do grassroots organizing all the time. One of my favorite organizations here in Albany, where I live, is called the Albany Justice Coalition. We have no staff, we have no funding. What we do is we keep a laser-like perspective and a laser-like look at what our city council is doing. And when things come up, we're down there. When things come up, letters get written. When things come up, phone calls get made. And we feel like we've had a successful year. Next week, we're going to have a little celebration for all the things that we think we accomplished, particularly around housing and our community police review board. And as I said, that's without the staff and that's without budget. That's just people putting their heads together every 2 weeks or so and saying, what are they up to now? I don't like that. You know, let's figure out what we can do about it. You can do, you're doing it. I know you're doing it because I've been at Brooklyn College. I know people are doing it right now.
Yes. Well, okay, so another question, and then, yes, we need to start wrapping up.
I know we're changing, we're gonna go for 3-4 minutes more just to get one more question in. But if you have to go to class, feel free to keep going.
Yes.
Wait, actually, why don't we do a pause to let people go, and then we'll do one more question after that.
Okay.
Thank you so much all for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
And we will
Thank
see you
you.
in April for Hess Week. I realized it was right on the clock.
Oh, yeah, so
So we let's take a pause and then finish up, and then I'll say a couple words.
unless you want to write 50 excuse notes.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. All right, see you in April. All right, have a good classes.
I'm gonna say, I mean, you have to go, but, you know, technically.
All right, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming out today. We'll see you soon. See you in April. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, now let's go to our questions.
Thank you. Listening to both of your comments and your answers to all the questions, one thing that I found a little alarming, I guess, is kind of this erasure of disabled folks. Even in a lot of these spaces where we speak, they are not accessible to people who need mobility devices. They're not accessible to people that have hearing issues. Sometimes they aren't accessible to people who can't see. So how do we kind of remedy that within our movement when we are leaving out a huge chunk of people that need to be in these rooms, need to hear everything, and need to also speak?
Yeah, great question. So, Barbara, did you hear the question?
I've heard parts of it,
Okay.
used about accessibility, is that true?
Yeah, so how do we make our meetings or events more accessible to people? Because clearly they're not as accessible as they need to be right now. So how do we affect that? You know, one of the things with, Barbara mentioned the organization that she works with in Albany, and we have organizations in Florida where basically the first question now is this question. Instead of saying that we're gonna, you know, form a movement about like higher minimum wage, let's talk about having meetings and kind of forums that are accessible to people who have different needs than I do, for example. So starting your organizing strategy with that question, I think is a really important question. I was thinking earlier today, and this is a little on a tangent, but the WPA, like a lot of this campus and a lot of this part of the city, were built by the Works Progress Administration, by workers who built these buildings. Now, this will seem like a tangent, but bear with me for a moment. So before the WPA created these buildings, before the GI Bill of Rights, these spaces were designed for a much smaller, much more elite, much more white, upper class population. Because before the WPA, before the 1930s, certainly before the GI Bill of Rights, public higher education was really designed for elites. The oldest public school in the country, by the way, in Chapel Hill, UNC Chapel Hill, the only people allowed to go to it for its first 100 years were the sons and daughters of slave owners. So, but how did these institutions become more accessible in the first place? When in the 30s, the WPA was something that came about not just because the government said, oh, let's start building public buildings that become Brooklyn College or the high school across the street, but it was the demands of that generation of people that said, we want accessibility. Now, it's not exactly the kind of accessibility you're asking for now, but it still was accessibility back in the day. And you know what the response to them was back in the 30s? I just finished 3 days of heaven in the University of Pittsburgh archive, where Barbara Smith spent time back when she was a graduate student. And what I read in the archives was big businesses saying, we don't need colleges to be accessible. We don't need all this stuff. We need workers to just to work the rest of their lives. We don't want them going to college, And so what I'm saying, I guess, is that keep organizing and have hope that if you build a large enough coalition, you will be able to make these spaces more inclusive, but it has to be deliberate, I think, from the outset. Barbara, I learned that from you.
Case, if I may just add, I think looking at your legal rights is very important. Having legal advice, not necessarily because you retain an attorney and pay them, but, find, an attorney, someone who's got knowledge. It could be a paralegal, could be a history professor for that matter, who is familiar with law around the rights of people living with disabilities, and see what your rights are on paper. And then another thing is for people to have the consciousness that we are all temporarily able. If you live long enough, you will become disabled. I've become a disabled person as a person who's in her late 70s, which I can hardly believe. But that's where I am. And the very fact that I'm with you today and able to communicate with you, that's an accommodation. That was an accommodation for my health and for my capacity. And all I can say to the student, I'm so sorry I can't see the students who are asking these questions, these really, really good questions. All I can say is that find your people who understand without having it necessarily to be explained, or explain it to them quickly and clearly and say, guess what? We're each other. You know what I'm talking about, because you've been those days when you couldn't manage whatever it was you know. So let's work together so that we can have a college and an institution that serves all of us.
If people are willing to bear, we'll take a couple more questions. Let's go here and then to Ellen.
Yes.
Okay, so this question is more directed towards Scholar Smith. But earlier you spoke about little feelings and how marginalized people's feelings have never been prioritized. Yet this idea that children learning historically accurate history being shameful for them or even painful, I think is problematic in itself and fuels a culture of white guilt, which I would assert is a result of covering up history rather than speaking about things in the open and giving anti-racist and white historical figures for young white children to identify with. So I guess my question is, how can we apply CRT and just like intersectionality and just like anti-racism in schools and in classrooms and just historical, accurate history for children that doesn't make them necessarily feel shameful, but rather has them address their complacency and responsibility within history, and also allows them to identify with historical figures that are anti-racist, that are anti-capitalist, that we're not a part of the problem, but rather a part of the solution. Like, how do we build allies?
Barbara, did that come through?
No, I did not hear that question.
Okay,
I did not hear it.
so the question is, if we want to be able to teach things like critical race theory, say in a K through 12 context, and we agree that that's a critical thing to be teaching, how do we do it in a way that makes everyone in the classroom feel okay? Is that kind
I
of,
don't think necessarily it's not about everyone feeling okay, but it's about having white children being able to identify with historical figures that were not complacent within capitalism, within racism, within
Okay.
slavery. So it's not necessarily about their feelings, but creating space for them to be allies
okay,
and to identify with people who were.
thank you. So Barbara, did you get that part? About creating a space where younger white children can be thinking of themselves as allies, and resonate with characters who like Ron DeSantis may think, oh, we don't want you talking about Frederick Douglass or Harriet Tubman, but how do we teach those characters in the classroom that white children would say, oh, okay, I kind of get it.
Or even like Nathaniel Bacon, like other
Well, literature is one of the best ways to do that. Is it okay for me to answer that?
Yes, yeah,
Paul?
please, yeah, it's you.
Yeah, this question, you're getting to one of my favorite subjects, which is how do you teach subject matter that can be challenging subject matter so that everyone in your classroom learns about what the subject matter is and also embraces it and feels safe. I've been doing this since the early 1970s. That's when I first started teaching African American literature. And very few people were doing that at that time. And every single position that I've ever had has been in a predominantly white institution. So I have always had classrooms that were diverse, but not necessarily diverse with a majority of the global majority, if you see what I'm saying. So I was teaching, my first real teaching job, and by real I mean one for which I had to be hired, as opposed to being a teaching assistant in a graduate program. Those were my first teaching experiences. But my first teaching job was at Emerson College in Boston. And I got that job in 1973. And I had the wonderful opportunity to teach African American literature, Black women writers, and then also composition, which is what most younger English grad students end up teaching, because everyone has to learn how to write, But be that as it may, I tell people this to this day. I had the philosophy I wanted every single student in my classroom to feel that I was there for them, that I was not teaching to a proportion or a percentage of the class. I was there for every single student in that classroom. I wanted them to be as excited about the subject matter as I was, and I presented it to them in a way, not that we weren't dealing with difficult topics, because it was African American literature, right? And in the case of Black women writers, we were also dealing with gender as well as race. But I wanted everyone in my classrooms to feel like, this is for you, They loved it. They absolutely loved it. I think that my love of the subject matter was infectious for them. And also, I did not see the content of anything I was teaching as a chance to beat people over the head. We read books about slavery. We read the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. We read the novel Jubilee. I even taught Uncle Tom's Cabin once, just for the sake of, see how they wrote about it? See how Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote about this period? See how Margaret Walker writes about it? What does Frederick Douglass have to say? It's different, isn't it? But the thing is that I didn't use any of those texts or any of that subject matter as an opportunity to make people feel awful. And I think that, yes, it was on the college level. Have, I have spoken in elementary school classrooms about my subject matter to the degree that I was able to do that. Of course, I was using appropriate books for that purpose. And it just seemed to me that the children liked it, and it's because I think that openness of heart, that I have. I didn't see being in a classroom as a chance to work out some psychodrama with my students. That was not what the classroom was for. So there's that.
Let's go to Ellen.
I think that tickled you, Paul.
Right.
Okay, let's go, okay, two more. Ellen, and then let's go to Tony. And then Lawrence will close us out. I mean, we could stay here all the way to April, it would be fantastic. Go ahead, Ellen.
So my name is Ellen. I'm the chair of the English department here. And I want to address the question that you asked. How do you reignite this movement that will change what's happening right now? And you said the last time it happened was, a couple of generations ago, because I am even older than Barbara and Paul, but I haven't given up. In the 1960s, there were two things happening. One was the civil rights struggle, and the other was the Vietnam War. Both terrible. And there was a tremendous outcry of ordinary people to stop this, both the war and the horrible stuff that was now visible because of television to everybody in the country that was happening in the South when fire hoses were turned on people who were demonstrating for equal rights. We have the same goddamn problem right now. We have somebody running for president who was the first person to talk about the damage that the 1619 Project was doing to white kids in this country. This was never a problem before they said it was a problem, just as Barbara said. And tonight, I'm going to go back to what I was thinking about before I talk. Tonight, Sean Hannity has invited Gavin Newsom and Ron D. Failing D. Santis to debate. And I hope that Newsom cleans D. Santis's clocks. But in order for us to get that sense of fire, I think we have to remember that what we've got to do right now is vote these people out of office. And that means being political organizers. The humanities needs to be represented. We're not going to get them back until we vote these people out. So I urge all of you to get involved in politics at this moment and do something about changing not only the politics of this country, but the political culture of this country.
Thank you. That is so critical. I mean, in Florida, it got so tiring for us union people to be the only people who'd show up and speak in support of, like, the 1619 curriculum or critical race theory. And we'd say, where's everyone else? Where's the Democratic Party? Come on, y'all. And so, again, being there for each other. See, here's the thing. I'll tell two anecdotes. One is because I do a lot of work with high schools or with school districts. Younger people, younger white kids are reading Toni Morrison. They are reading Alice Walker. They're reading James Baldwin at levels that would have been completely unknown when I was in high school, right? I was lucky to have a teacher who made sure I read Richard Wright in high school. Now, that was unusual back in the day. It's not unusual right now. I mean, and so school districts are seeing this. The movement energy, the spark, is at the high school level now. It's not really necessarily at the college level, although it could be. The other thing I'll mention is that a couple of years ago, I got a call from a state official in Connecticut, a state of which I know very little of. And she said, Professor Ortiz, we'd like you to be in this curriculum committee because we have demands from our high school students in the state of Connecticut that we implement African American Puerto Rican and Latino history as a sequence. And I am on so many committees, I thought, oh, not another committee. She said, before you say anything, I'm going to send you 2 YouTube videos. And then you can tell me what your decision is going to be. The YouTube videos she sent me were of middle school and high school Afro-Latino students going to their state legislature in Connecticut and demanding and saying, why don't we have Puerto Rican studies? Why can't we study African American history at the high school level? And it brought tears to the eyes of, I mean, I hadn't seen a state legislator cry in years. Some of them were up there teary-eyed because you have kids demanding to read more. As a professor, I get teary-eyed too. My students demanding to read more? That is so cool. So the spark is there, I think. But the political thing, yeah, when the state legislature, when the city council goes into session, we've got to be there, y'all. Dr. King said education is great, social action is great, but what makes them effective is when you put them together. What did he say? Dr. King said education without social action is like weak and ineffectual. Social action without education is kind of ignorance. Terrible paraphrase, by the way. Don't quote me on that. Sorry, Barbara, I got carried away.
And we have Tony and then Lawrence, and then we really should.
Yeah.
I just want to say how glorious I feel to be here. I'm an alum. I was part of that generation that I was talking about at Brooklyn College. When I came in, I hated this school because it didn't reflect me at all. At that time, there were cinco gatos, what we call 5 Puerto Ricans around.
Tony, do you want to come and use the podium so it's easier for Barbara?
Oh.
Yeah, come up. And then Lawrence, if you want to do the same. That way you don't have to translate.
Okay, yeah.
Because she can hear this microphone.
Yeah, but I want to make mention of one particular person who's actually a sponsor. Her name was used as a sponsor. It's the Center for Latino Studies, which was named after Maria Sanchez. She was the woman that we fought for back in 1974 when the 2 major issues, the civil rights movement and the war in Vietnam, were hot. And we were activists on campus because we're saying there's nothing here for us, nothing that we can be proud of. And we went to war with the administration at that time. The president that came much later, the one that was in place, we had to convince him, and we had a social movement. And Maria Sanchez, I remember very clearly because it goes so much to what we're talking about here. She says, the things that we fight for, we have to institutionalize. We have to create institutions. And the department was created. We were arrested. There were a number of the famous BC 44, 41 students and 3 faculty members. Of the 3 faculty members, Sonia Nieto, Herminio Vargas, who passed away recently, and myself, we were arrested. And we came back, after the arrests, we came back on campus, and the slogan was, BC 44, we come back to give you more. Why do I say that? Because Maria became the chair. She became the chair of the department. And she said institutionalization is important, especially now that we're beginning to talk about something called a core curriculum. Oh, core curriculum. Okay, a core curriculum that would consist of 10 courses. And the architect of that was the man that has institutionalized the Hess lectures, Robert L. Hess, nephew of the guy that owns the oil, everything else. Yeah. So Robert L. Hess believed in the idea of a core curriculum, and guess what? He was an Africanist. Actually, his whole study was Ethiopia, Haile Selassie. And he believed in the whole idea that a core curriculum had to be established at Brooklyn College, but that they had to be the parts of the world that were not in the curriculum because it was heavily Eurocentric. He said, we have to have a course, at least one course, that talks about everything that now exists here at Brooklyn College for the different departments. It started when Hess said that, and he talked to Maria Sanchez about it, because we had always wanted to be an interdisciplinary department, which we've been from the very beginning. And he told Maria, I know what you've done because I studied it. And of course, let me tell you, Hess was probably the best, in my estimation, the best president that Brooklyn College ever had. He told Maria Sanchez something very interesting. He said, you're going out there into the barricades to get what you want. And you have a community behind you because the department was started by a group of students. Then it expanded to community. He says, and I know that you guys, whenever you have problems with the administration, you go to the barricades. So he said, you no longer have to do that because I understand who you're about. So from now on, we have this nice round table, and it was in his office. I remember I was there with Maria at that time. And he said, you can come and discuss it here. And she said, in her Puerto Rican accent, in English, she said, President Hess, I understand everything that you're saying, and we would love to get together with you at your round table to discuss our issues, but we haven't forgotten how to do the other. So, the reason why I say that is that institutionalization is so important because this is an institution, the Hess Lectures, right? And for a long time, and I attended a few even after I retired, they didn't have the kind of import that we have now that have to do with the crisis that exists in higher education. So I'm talking about the idea of institutionalization as that kind of a thing that changes the nature of the academy. And I was so glad to work with many colleagues here at Brooklyn College. I know Ellen knows the history of Puerto Rican studies and the whole struggle that we went through. But if we institutionalize, if we make that a point, that another quite incident very quickly, there was a time there was a fight between Italian students and Puerto Rican students because in their classes they had learned about Columbus and how terrible Columbus had been in the Caribbean and everything else with the indigenous peoples there. And that fight that took place on campus led to the, actually it was Professor Viscusi, who was here in the English department.
Former director of the Wolf.
Former director of the Wolf Institute, another institution that's very important. He got together with us and he said, why don't we have let's bring together a forum of the Italian students, right, from the Calandra Institute and everything else, and the Puerto Rican students from PRA, the organization that has historically been important in creating the department. And we had actually a get-together with students and faculty with great food, Italian food, Latino food, and everything else. And we decided that Columbus Day would then be called the Day of Indigenous Peoples. And so that was the beginning of that. Of course, so what I'm saying is, this is hugely important, the idea that institutions, the work that Professor Ortiz, the kind of way in which the academy has to be active. I mean, it's very important. There's nothing wrong with being a scholar activist. I mean, I realize that it's not that the ivory tower exists and that we preach and that we form you and make you, or is it make you little copies of ourselves, because that's what the right wing is doing in this country, saying that we, even at Harvard, the students are stupid because they're following what the faculty is saying. The point here is that institutions are so important in being able to carry forward our work. And here at Brooklyn College, I'm very proud that I was here and that I was very much a part of that. And all colleagues that are still here and doing that kind of work has made this place so special, because it wasn't when I got into Brooklyn College. First of all, it was free, absolutely free. I did all my undergraduate and graduate work absolutely free, right? But to get to Brooklyn College at that time in 1964, you had to have a 92 average to get in. Could you imagine coming from a school in Williamsburg or Bushwick or Bed-Stuy and being Puerto Rican or black and getting a 92 average? Well, that was not going to happen, right? But those of us, the few of us that got together, those cinco gatos, we got together and said, we have to do something. We have to change that. And again, major thing that I see that it's hugely important that Brooklyn College has done is the creation of institutions and to make them constantly remind us that this is the way in which we can confront, especially the crisis that we have now in this country, which is completely, what do they call it, woke? Merriam-Webster dictionary now has put the word woke as part of the vocabulary. So that's all. Thank
you for
you.
the institutional history. Let's actually, Lawrence, and then we have Barbara and Paul comment on both, and then. But if you have to go, I understand. When we come back in April, we'll still be talking. Go ahead, Lawrence.
I'll just be very brief. When we talk about defending the humanities, at the most core is the idea that we have to defend humans, particularly our students. And that's no easy thing to say because in 10 years of being a professor here, one thing I know is that my students always tell me that they do not feel like a real human being at Brooklyn College. They feel like a number, a cog in a machine. Their tuition dollars are being counted. And that is a type of de-incentivizing where when they actually do show up in the classroom, they feel like they just want to take their class and leave campus. We do not create an environment fit for human beings, right? So when we talk about defending the humanities, we have to defend students by making Brooklyn College a place that they want to be. And I say this because we had the conversation earlier about politics. There is no politics happening on campus right now more important than a group of students who stood before a faculty council and demanded a better Brooklyn College. And the fact that we have not embraced those students at large as a campus is a failure of the human spirit, because that's been the most inspiring thing I've seen in my 10 years at Brooklyn College. So we cannot talk about defending the humanities if we're not willing to defend our students. That's all.
So I will be back in April. So I'll have between now and April, and I had the chance to sit in on a faculty, on a reading group that was reading African American Latinx history of the United States. So I'll just make a couple brief comments. One is that everything that's been said today is important. Everything that's been said today in the audience is of tremendous value. Everything that has been said, but also things that haven't been said. If you've been sitting and thinking, you know, I want to say something, I feel something in my heart very strongly, that's important too. And that is part of what affirming humanity, I think, really is. Listening to student voices, again, what I've seen in the past several years, talking to students in California, talking to students in Maryland, talking to students in Wisconsin, talking to students in Michigan, talking to students in Florida, we are all saying the same thing. We don't feel heard in this society right now. The society is led by a certain calculus that doesn't take in the human spirit, that doesn't value humanity, and here we are talking about the humanities. The last story that I'll share with you is that several years ago, I got a call one evening from a high school teacher at Garfield High School in East Los Angeles, one of our iconic Chicano majority high schools. There was a movie even about it that came out 20, 30 years ago. Was it Stand and Deliver, I think was that one. So his teacher called me and she said, you know, Professor Ortiz, I'm sure you're familiar with Garfield High School. 90% of our students are Chicano students. They've started reading this author that none of the teachers really are very familiar with. And we'd like you to come out and talk to our students about this author because we know you've written something about him. And I said, well, who's the author? Oh, it's James Baldwin. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm going to be on the next plane out there. So I got one of my former PhD students, Jonathan Gomez, who's an assistant professor of Black and Chicano studies at San Jose State University, and we flew out to Los Angeles to take part of this discussion. And what we found out was that these high school students had a James Baldwin book club. But before we could make it to the high school, we got bad news. The bad news was the principal found out, or the school board, or one of them found out that we were going to have this meeting with these high school students who had a James Baldwin book club. Can you imagine as a high school student having a James Baldwin book club? I mean, my God. Well, anyway, the principal or the powers that be found out about it and canceled the event because they had started reading James Baldwin And he said, we can't be having high school kids read James Baldwin. That's too mature. So we ended up, because we were organizers and we had learned from Barbara Smith, we said, well, we'll just have the event at East Side Cafe in East Los Angeles, which is an iconic Chicano movement space, okay? And so we met with these high school students at East Side Cafe, and the first question I had, what do you see in James Baldwin? What do you love about James Baldwin? And they said, look, Professor Ortiz, they said, we grew up we understand what Harlem was like when James Baldwin was growing up, because he writes about Harlem. We grew up in over-policed, violent societies, communities that are under economic stress. Many of our parents are incarcerated. And we read this in James Baldwin, that he went through this too. But here's the thing we love about him as Chicano youth. He never turned his back on his community. No matter how tough it was, he loved Harlem. And he always went back there no matter where he was. And so that's why we read James Baldwin. And I thought, this is such a great moment to share 10 years from now when I'm a Hess Scholar.
Barbara.
I know we've gone past the midnight hour, so to speak, but Professor Ortiz just said the magic word, James Baldwin. And given that you said the magic word, we could be here for another hour. We're explaining back and forth James Baldwin's story. But that epitomizes what it is we're trying to convey, what we have tried to convey today. That this content is magical, it is empowering, it's fascinating, it's, spare me the expression, it's potentially universal. We understand what Harlem is like because we grew up in El Barrio in Los Angeles. We understand it. It's just like when I was reading Terry Thomas. I said, oh yeah. So be that as it may, as I said, that epitomizes it, the fact that you had to switch gears and go to a community space, the fact that the powers that be weren't afraid of you reading one of the classic, greatest writers in the English language who ever existed, just shows how much work we have to do and why we're so committed to the work that we do. But I just enjoyed this so much, and I just want to say so much and share so much gratitude to you, Paul, to everyone at the Wolf Institute. I didn't know about that Hess connection. Never occurred to me that Hess gas has something to do with President Hess. That's a new one for me. But be that as it may, it's just been a wonderfully rich experience. And thank you for making it possible for me to participate from up the Hudson River.
And thank you. I'm imagining a Paul and Barbara traveling tour. I think we're gonna have to tour you around the country. Yes. So well, you're definitely both coming back in April, the first week of April. We have a series of public programs from April 1st to the April 4th. Barbara will come down. Paul will come up from Florida, and we'll continue this conversation. Thank you to everyone in the audience. Thank you for sticking with us.